We're very, very lucky today to have this panel of artists and also Mary Jo Aagerstoun, who is a PhD independent art historian specializing in contemporary activist art and climate change awareness and action. Mary Jo received her PhD from the University of Maryland's Art History and Archaeology Department with a dissertation on discourses of oppositionality in U.S. art of the 1980s and 90s. She's based here in West Palm Beach and is currently focused on direct action related to climate disruption. So totally perfect for this talk. We have Carin Wagner with us today. Carin is the 2022 recipient of both the Cultural Council for Palm Beach County's Artist Innovation Fellowship and the South Florida Cultural Consortium grant. She graduated with a degree in advertising design from the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. She works predominantly in oil on canvas with a message of environmental protection at the core of her work. Currently, she's photographing and painting the vulnerable and vanishing trees of the United States. That's the project that you should come back for the Artist Innovation Fellowship Showcase, which is this summer. And that's going to be amazing. Very excited. She is exhibited throughout the U.S. and her work has been included in multiple museum shows here in Florida. Jason Bregman, here in the center, is a partner at Singer Studio and the owner of Complex Projects LLC. He is a designer and project manager of large-scale landscape and infrastructure planning projects, many of which I'm sure you've seen. His design work focuses on sustainable and regenerative systems integration that help to restore damaged environments. Jason has worked closely with Michael Singer Studio since 2000 on projects including parks, infrastructure, community planning, waterfronts, environmental sculptures, commercial buildings, housing, and corporate campuses. Unfortunately, Diane Arrieta, the other artist who was supposed to be with us today, is ill and not able to attend, but I'm going to let you know about her work. Diane is a mixed media installation artist focusing on environmental issues. She received her BFA in Studio Art Sculpture. She's the founding director of the International Humanities Project Curatorial Lab. This is a think tank of professional artists, curators, academics, and scientists who convene for the purpose of fostering critical dialogue and new paradigms related to contemporary art practices. She received her master's degree in biology, focusing on wildlife health, transboundary zoonotic diseases, which we all need to know about, and endangered species, and is experienced in animal husbandry with a wide variety of species. I believe that, Mary Jo, you have some of Diane's comments that we discussed in the process, so you'll be able to speak a little bit for Diane. So I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, great. Well, first I want to thank and congratulate the Cultural Council for having this show and bringing us all here. I mean, nothing could be more topical, right, than climate change. We're really in Florida at the center of the target for climate change, along with many other oceanfront communities and nations around the world. So it's extremely important that we have gatherings like this in every kind of possible institutional setting. So before I get into asking my panelists some questions and sharing with you some of the things that Diane Arrieta has suggested are relevant to her art, I wanted to give you a little bit of context. Some of you will remember that climate change came on the scene during a congressional hearing in 1993 in which James Hansen, a scientist from the from one of the big government agencies that deals with space science and also with earth science as well. And he testified that for the first time before Congress that the environment and the atmosphere was warming. And the term global warming really came from that. Following on that, of course, one of his students and people who was affected by him did a beautiful film in 2006. And I'm sure some of you did see that. In the, what's the name of it again? It's like, So it's been three decades since Jim Hansen spoke before Congress, and then we had The Inconvenient Truth in 2006. About the same time, we also had Bill McKibben, who is probably well known to you as the founder of 350.org, 350 standing for 350 parts per million of greenhouse gases being the limit that we can really hope to have a decent life on Earth. Of course, we passed that by over 100 since then, at least. And then in 2014, there was a huge worldwide demonstration on climate disruption. And following that, the UN conference in Paris, also the UN climate conference that actually had an art aspect to it, art COP21. And there was a research project that was done there on the kinds of art that have most effect on human acceptance of climate disruption and encouragement of action on it. And this study was just published in 2021. And some of the findings of this study were that there were several different kinds. There was something called the comforting utopia, the challenging dystopia, the mediocre mythology, I love that one, and the awesome solution aspects of climate art. And they concluded that the awesome solution version was the most effective in terms of spurring people who were viewing that art to actually take action, which is what we really need, right? We need to all be taking action. So I'd like to kind of embroider on that a little bit by talking about the climate art types that we can see in this exhibition. So what we see in this exhibition are two kinds right now. We see descriptive mirroring types of art, which is easily readable. It's direct, and sometimes it's polemical. And it may show dystopic landscapes, or it may show other kinds of more positive landscapes that are really, they're really kind of trying to remind us of the beauty that we are losing. So not dystopic particularly, but something that is a little bit more positive. So we have that, and those are for primarily for galleries and museums. And so what we're seeing in this exhibition is art that is primarily for galleries and museums. And the other kind is the metaphoric and abstract art, and we do see several examples there. With the descriptive mirroring, it's pretty much, you're seeing what you get. I mean, it really basically often has text incorporated in it so that you can't miss the message. So it's very direct. And then the other kind, the more metaphoric, you may not even recognize it as anything that has anything to do with climate. And we do have many examples of those also in this particular exhibition. Now, how that relates to most effective, I'm going to leave to your discretion to try to determine when you go and look at the art, but you might keep those things in mind. How effective is this being on me? When I go, do I feel like I'm more apt to be active as a result of this? Or if I brought a friend who isn't as active, would this be something that would encourage them to be more active? So then the other kinds of art that are not included in this exhibition include things such as, well, there's one project that is in collaboration, which is often with scientists, engineers, planners. Sometimes the artists are embedded with institutions, including government institutions, and in which there is an actual partnership that even goes beyond collaboration, so that what comes out of it is actually something quite different. And it may not look like art. So if you're going through the exhibition and you see the project that Jason was involved in that is helping to make our reefs more healthy, you might not immediately think of it as art, even as sculpture. So, it's something to be keeping in mind. We need to have our minds open as to what art is in relation to climate disruption. so that we can be as open as possible to consider the kinds of options that will help us all move in that direction. So the other two that I mentioned would be community arts that are not in this show. And these are artworks and artists that mobilize communities. And they often use street type art in that particular kind of art. And so street art would include murals, sculptures, projections on buildings, billboards, performances, which could be individual, group, or even mass organizations. Many artists are involved in organizing huge organizations and huge projects like Extinction Rebellion. And you should grab, if you're not QR oriented, we'll have the QR up on the screen for the resources that we put together for you that are in various categories of things that you, if you're artists or if you're not artists, you can learn more information and get more involved. So I hope that gives you a little bit more basic understanding of kind of the context in which we're sitting here today, both the overall Earth-wide context as well as the art context that relates directly to disruption. So art that relates to climate disruption is not new. The question is, what kind of art can we be encouraging here in Palm Beach County? I think that's really the next step. So I want to start out because our exhibition curator, Jessica, who's done a great job of supporting artists here in Palm Beach County and giving a lot of visibility to everyone. She hopes that this show will encourage viewers to consider how the visual methods convey human interaction with and influence on our changing environment. So I'd like each of you to discuss how you believe the methods in your work in this show convey human interaction and influence on climate disruption. You want to start, Carin?
Sure. So my work initially was focusing on the beauty of our untouched native landscapes or individual flora and fauna. But then as I gradually became more climate aware, I started focusing in on a message of protection for our endangered trees. I don't know if any of you are aware, but there are 116 critically endangered, that doesn't include endangered and threatened, critically endangered trees just in the United States alone. And believe me, it's not confined just to the United States. So that's the path that my work is.
Could you just say a little bit more about what's causing the endangerment? I mean, is this only climate change or is there something else involved?
So there are multiple problems, most of them exacerbated by climate change. But you've got, with the climate change, you've got the extreme temperatures, you've got the droughts, the wildfires that affect vast swaths. But there are also pests that have been imported because we don't inspect materials that come in from overseas. We have imported lots of pathogens. So one of them is a fungal blight that killed off nearly 4 billion chestnuts. That was started by importing a Japanese chestnut tree in the late 1800s. So it killed nearly 4 billion trees. The emerald ash borer that's out there right now, that has so far killed upwards of 100 million native ash trees in the United States. Our Florida torreya, which some of you may have never seen because it's confined to the region of Apalachicola, used to be abundant. In the last 100 years, we've lost 98.5% of those trees. So it's not just climate change, but it's all linked because we've got overgrazing, we've got overdevelopment, and with the temperatures swinging wildly, you also have these warmer winters that, the cold used to kill off some of these pests. But now because we don't have a protracted freeze, the pests are allowed to flourish. So it's all connected. It's all connected. So, we can start it with something, but then it's exaggerated or exacerbated by the climate change.
Right. So could you say just a little bit about which of the pieces of your work in this show are sort of most associated with the thing that you're most concerned with?
Right. This started in 2011 when I started to become a little bit more aware. I hadn't done the research that I've done since then, but it was, dead trees grow no new leaves. So, the leaves are actually responsible for transpiration. And I don't know if any of you know what transpiration is, but it's one of my favorite things that I found out. It's that the trees use very little of the water themselves, but they draw it in through the roots and they release it through the leaves, and that becomes part of the water cycle that the Amazon rainforest can affect a farmer in Texas. So that actually, when trees are transpiring on a massive scale, that's called evapotranspiration. So that's millions of trees at once creating our weather. So it's really, to me, this is just so astonishing because we already know that trees do so much for us, right? I mean, they store carbon and, they shelter animals, they feed us, we use them for, building so many things. But the fact that they create the climate, I think, is just astonishing.
One of the things that people might notice when they go to see the work that's in the show is that there doesn't appear to be any endangered species in the show. Is that true? Or?
So, not in my work at the moment. So I really do hope that all of you will come back and see the show in June, because I've been working for 4 years on this series and it's going to be very special. I've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy traveling all over as environmentally friendly as possible. When I was in California, I managed to get 12 different trees. So anytime I go to an area, I try to make sure that I get every tree possible. So I really hope you all will come back for that.
That's great, and we hope that there are going to be some Florida native trees in your exhibition.
Oh, there are. Yes, there absolutely are.
Very good. So let's move on to Jason. How would you respond to the question? Do you need me to repeat it?
Yeah, actually wouldn't be a bad idea.
Okay, sorry.
Mary Jo, also I want to say, Jason, Lenita Fix is also here today from the Reef Institute, so we should also note that the
could you identify yourself in case people want to talk to you? Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. So what the exhibition curator wanted to have in the show was works that would inspire in the viewers questions about human interaction with and influence on our changing environments. And so what we're trying to get from you right now is what are the methods, visual and otherwise, in the work, in the show, Michael Singer Studio show, in the show, that conveys human interaction and influence on climate disruption.
So, Carin did a beautiful job of explaining, trees and how they relate to the world and the climate and the whole ecosystem. And I think it would be great, actually, Lenita, if you don't mind, just to, because you speak to it so eloquently, just to kind of explain the problem that we're facing. See, we're an art studio, right? We go and sometimes in this case, we sought out the Reef Institute. We wanted to work on, environmental issues. We work on them throughout all of our different projects. But we sought out the Reef Institute to work on local marine issues here in South Florida. Our studio in Florida is in Delray Beach. And they've been wonderful to work with. We've worked together for now almost 5 years probably. So Lenita, if you could kind of explain the problem better about the die-off and the disease and what the corals are.
Can I ask you to go up?
That'd be great, yeah. Go on up.
I'll awkwardly stand in the corner right here.
You can stand in front of me.
Please.
No, that's okay.
We want to see you on.
She's getting in there?
Okay. He can move it for a second. Yeah, so I was explaining when I first got here that what's been really wonderful is that a lot of times when an organization like myself is asked to partner, it really is a collaboration, not a partnership. And we've been really, really honored that it's been a true partnership. with Singer Studios. And so a little bit to speak to, she spoke to the land side of what's going on in climate disruption. I can speak to the ocean side of what's happening. There's a lot of statistics that are important to the ocean. 70% of the world's oxygen comes from the ocean. The weather is also affected by the ocean. That's the other part of the water cycle. But to this piece right here that Jason is going to be speaking on, 97% of all wave energy in any area that is close to a coral reef is protected. It's our first line of defense. So Stanford University, a study from there, says that 97% of all wave energy is first absorbed by coral reefs. So how many of you know our reefs are in trouble? Okay. So how many of you believe that the reefs that are the most in trouble is the Great Barrier Reef? Okay. We have 2% of our coral reefs left in the state of Florida. 2. We have 6% across the Caribbean. And that's from a disease called stony coral tissue loss disease. We were talking about it in, it's people, it's always people. And it's kind of, what is the cause behind it? I would say it's a lot of different things combined together. But the reality is that this disease, which was first seen off the coast of Miami and Virginia Key in 2014, has since affected all of the Florida Reef Tract and across the Caribbean. And so we always say taking care of coral is taking care of people. So what we do at the Reef Institute is we do a lot of different things in coral restoration, but you probably are aware that in Florida we have more artificial reefs per capita than almost anywhere else in the world. But up until recently, those reefs were seen as alternative dive sites or alternative fishing sites. They weren't really seen as a way to create a gray-green space that could produce a living reef, to really recruit coral and to be able to not just create that coral habitat, but to protect the coastline, to genuinely not just create a habitat, but attract the coral animal itself. And so that's what we kind of set out to do with Singer Studios.
So now I'd like to bring it back to Jason.
Yeah, so that's what I was just about to hand it back to him. So the bottom line was creating something to protect our coastline was interacting with the people, even though you may never see it. So,
at some point, I don't know if this is part of it, but what they did at Bryant Park and Snook Islands by building these man-made structures with the mangroves growing through it. Now people are piling up rock cairns, and it's just really beautiful to see the life come. I remember when it was just a broken up seawall.
right.
We'd sit on it and watch fireworks with one leg hanging through the hole. And now look at, I think Lake Worth has done.
Well, and I'm sure, Jason will talk about the mangrove plant.
So
here.
before Jason starts, I'd just like to say that this I think raises the issue about what constitutes art. Because, if we're talking about traditional media, which most of the works in this show are traditional media, painting, a little bit of photography, collage, sculpture, so forth. So where does, the kind of work that Singer Studio is now world renowned for? Michael Singer is often described to me as an architect, for example. But he's not an architect. He never went to architecture school and, whatever. But he doesn't believe in honoring, arbitrary divisions and arbitrary barriers. So he works across disciplines. So this is one of the things that's wonderful about the Michael Singer studio. And why don't you say a little bit about how you came up with the kind of concrete? Because again, most artists are concerned with the materials, right? Materials very often the material is very often the first thing that inspires an artist, right? So let's talk about the materials that the Singer Studio is come up with to work with the science.
Sure thing. So I've worked with Michael Singer for over 20 years, and so I can speak to a lot of the kind of more technical issues behind a lot of the materials and things like that, and projects like this that are really actually quite technical and involve a lot of engineering and biology kind of coming together. So in terms of the actual materials, this is a great story behind this, is that when we first came to the Reef Institute, we said what we'd like to start with is just the materials and the textures. If you look really closely here, there's a series of tiles. These are all sculptured textures. We've created these different types of textures for a range of different projects and different things that we were doing. We said we would like to know if the corals and other creatures want to recruit more so on one with these kind of quasi-rocky textures or linear textures versus on flat texture. We also then did different types of surface treatments to those materials. We also tried about 10 or 12 different types of materials in terms of cementitious mixes. And what we were really trying to do was push the boundary on concrete. It's what you would consider concrete, what we'd all consider concrete, what this building is made out of. But actually, the ones that we're using, and then the one that's in the exhibit there, that's 70% recycled material. And it's stronger than any sidewalk or the concrete in this building. We could be using it throughout all of South Florida. There's enough recycled material and what people call junk to actually utilize and actually make this type of concrete. The thing is that our current industries aren't aligned to do that. There are people making money off of mining Portland cement somewhere else. But because of that Portland cement, the carbon intensity of concrete is extremely high. It's about approximately 7% of carbon emissions, anthropogenic carbon emissions, in the human spectrum of what is creating global warming and climate change. 7% is from concrete, from humans making concrete. So I think the airlines for the entire world is 3%, something like that. So when people are like, well, don't fly so much, I was like, well, how about you change your concrete? The concrete that you see out there is 40% less carbon intense because we replaced out a good chunk of the Portland cement out of it with a recycled material. And we can do that through a combination of material science, testing, and just really, frankly, just a lot of experimentation. And we did this with the Reef Institute in part to get them to put them in their tanks and see how they do. And I had this one idea, I was like, we should use diatomaceous earth. It's amazing, it's made of diatoms from the ocean. It's gonna do great. And it's gonna replace out all the Portland cement, and we're gonna be able to, and the snails hated it. The snails were dying, and the snails can't handle it, and we need the snails. Who knew you needed snails for a reef, but you need the snails. So we're like, you can't use the diatomaceous earth, isn't really gonna work for these types of artificial reef structures. But but other materials did. And so what you see out there, the aggregate, sometimes we use recycled concrete as aggregate. That one out there has oyster shell, which comes from the oyster industry. So, when you eat your oyster, people have canned oysters or whatever people want. And there's a whole slew of oyster shell out there that's not being utilized. New Orleans has an amazing recycling program for oyster shell to get it back out there. A lot of places don't. But they do grind it up, they do crush it, and they often feed it to chickens and stuff for calcium. So you can get it, and it's a recycled product. And then the glass in there, the sand, the world, I don't know if you know, but the world's actually running out of sand too. So we're explaining that there's all these problems that we've created as humans on this planet. And they're actually mining sand out of the Mekong, to build buildings in China. It's going to be a big problem. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. But that piece out there, concrete needs sand. All that sand in there is recycled. We have so much glass in Palm Beach County in South Florida that is unused. When you drink a beer out of that bottle and it gets crushed, they don't know what to do with that. You could replenish, you could build these reefs mostly out of that. So there's a lot that could be done that we're not doing. And the reason why it's art is because no one else is doing this. That's the reason why it's art. It's not like the engineers aren't going around saying, how can we just make the best concrete we can that's the lowest carbon concrete and then experiment with it and see if it works in the ocean. Yes, no one's doing that. Right. And that's why we need artists to do it, because no one else is doing it. So that's how we see art. When Michael always says it's about asking questions, it's about exploring. Right. That's to us, that's the art. That's how it comes together. So
yes, and I think it could fit in with the sort of movement of process art too, and time-based art. So we have many little pigeonholes in art history where we could throw some of these practices that they do. But what I want to point out to you is that there's a few copies over there. I think there's only 10, so I don't think there's enough for everybody. But maybe we can put on the website a QR code for it. but there's a wonderful artist out of Chicago, the University of Chicago, Francis Whitehead, who has written this terrific thing that it just gives me shivers every time I read it. And it's called What Do Artists Know? And I encourage you to take a look at that, because basically what she did was she put it together because she wanted to become an embedded artist with the Chicago city government. And she needed to prove to the government that she had skills that they could use. So she came up with this list of things that she knew, and that she knew that other artists knew as well. And it is quite a list. And we won't go into it now, but I want to say that everything that Jason has said right now is perfect around experimentation, of coming up with new materials that we could use in building our buildings right now. I mean, this is something that is an invention. I hope you're getting a patent on it, you know.
It's
So
a
at
recipe.
any rate,
Can't patent recipe.
but whatever it is, you know, it's innovation. It's working across discipline. This is all very much part of what artists need to be doing more of to help us fight against, you know, the apocalypse that it will surely come, because we haven't moved fast enough. So thank you so much, Jason. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is kind of related, and it's how does your practice, now we're talking about not just what's in the show now, but how does your climate practice educate about or focus on climate crisis narrative? I think these can be short questions because we've kind of talked a lot about that already with the first question, but just quickly. Caroline.
Right, again, you know, with each one of the trees that I find that's endangered, I research what the causes were, you know, and hopefully with the show that's upcoming, I'll be able to show you each one of these trees and what impacted it and what's being done in order to bring that tree back, or at least stabilize it so that we don't keep losing all of these trees. And, you know, I'm sure you are part of the solution, right? And I'd like to be part of the solution. I really do feel like there's, the fossil fuel industry has such a massive platform and lobbying power that we've all just been stuck for so long, you know, and so many people aren't informed about it. They just don't know. So I feel like with the upcoming exhibit, you'll be able to see what trees are being impacted, the ones that I've been able to get to so far, and what's being done to help stabilize that population or bring it back.
Great.
I mean,
Jason?
trees are
Life.
I mean,
Everything.
if everybody in South Florida planted a tree, I mean, it doesn't, you know, you say, you know, you're part of the solution, I'm part of the solution, we're all part of the solution. I have one of those gardens people hate that, like, they drive by and they're like, no one lives there, it's like abandoned. Or something like that. It's all Florida native plants out front and the fruits in the back. And, you know, I'm out there toiling, ask my wife, you know, I'm out there toiling, sweating all over on a Sunday, you know, trying to trim everything. But people think the house is abandoned or something, but if every home, or every other home, or every 10th home just had more native plants and absorbed more of the stormwater and breathed more and transpired more,
Exactly.
it would use
And
less
supported
water.
the native
Oh, yeah.
fauna,
We
right?
get
All the little
flowers,
insects
butterflies.
that need
Oh.
to eat on
Yeah.
those native plants, exactly.
There's some good question right there.
West Palm Beach gives out trees, the city of West Palm
Sure,
Beach.
yeah.
Riviera
The
Beach
city,
just,
I mean, Westwood within the city, they will give out trees at different times of year, small trees, so they're making an effort.
Riviera Beach has a tree donation program as well.
And your list over there,
I
community
live there, I've
greening.
never-
Yes, and I have community greening from at Delray. So whatever your community is in, I think Palm Beach Gardens has one as well.
Lakewood has an Earth Day, I've gotten
Yeah,
trees from them.
absolutely.
Right,
Boynton
so
has
look
one.
for it
They do.
and be
Yeah.
sure to plant a tree this year. At least one in your yard if you have a yard.
And I have done that at past exhibitions, even here at the Cultural Council where I've given away native trees at the start of an exhibition. And I don't know if Jessica will let me, but if she
Sorry,
will.
question?
I've given away native saplings, usually little guys, you know, at the start of exhibitions. So if you're up for that, you know, we'll have a table with some native trees that people can take home and plant.
That's
So.
And
wonderful.
also, are
Did
you
you,
working with Solid Waste Authority?
We helped design their waste energy plant. Yeah, so If you haven't been there to visit it, you should. It's a world-class facility. It's definitely set the standard for the United States.
Where
It's
is
something
it?
that Palm Beach County should be really, really proud of. It doesn't really talk about much.
Right.
Where is it?
Why can't you get more bottles, because there's so many from the waste?
They'll give them away for free.
But will they give them to use it?
If I had a huge warehouse that someone was willing to loan us, and we could get the funding for the machinery on it, we could crush that glass, and we could package it and sell it, and it could be used as a sand replacement if it's done properly.
Maybe they should do it.
There's a business there for someone. You're taking something that someone thinks should be free, and actually turning it into something that everybody actually needs. And the thing is that the way it's just like the oil industry and the gas industry. The structure's already in place to make something affordable the way it is now. And if people don't think beyond the way something is now, then it won't change, because all the cost structure's already built into it. If you already have a pipeline, that's why people fight pipelines. If you already have a pipeline, you can't beat them. Their prices are too low. Everything's already in place. But when you create a new system, if someone wants to create that new system, things can change. And that's a huge reason that we don't see the momentum on these issues that we should see.
Where is your waste facility?
Our waste facility?
No,
The waste
Palm Beach
facility
County.
for Palm Beach County, SWA's, the new waste energy facility out there. Yeah, yep, it's out west.
And
Really
you
worth
can, they do tours, and you should really go.
And if you like the
You should go.
design, that was our studio design, new waste energy plant, and the educational component, we were a big part of, that was developed with Potion Design, and they did an amazing job making that really interactive educational piece. And there's a whole climate change story about that facility too. That facility also, we designed it as part of it from the day one, collects stormwater off all the roofs. And every time I go to conferences, I mention that it's a 2 million gallon rainwater harvesting tank. And I say, anyone in the room know of a bigger one in the world? Anyone for rainwater, for processed water, for an industrial building? No one named it. So I do think it's, to my knowledge, it's at least the largest in the country, possibly the largest rainwater harvesting complex for processed water. Yeah. And they did it. That's a world-class facility. Check it out if you haven't been there.
And, I'd just like to also tell you, if you go to michaelsinger.com, their wonderful website, you can check out every single wonderful project that they have done and think about, is this art? And then decide for yourself, what is art and actually, it's a big question. And I think everybody up here would probably say that, what we need to be doing is expanding our minds more into considering what practice is, that it's not just making objects, it's much bigger than that. So the other thing that brought to mind about materials is, in this particular exhibition, we have quite a few artists that are consciously using natural materials. And there are also, I think, at least one artist, I can't remember who it is, but if you're here, raise your hand, who specifically is using toxic materials and is articulating that, at least in her description of her practice, because she wants to raise consciousness. Now, the problem with that is that you have to read the artist's statement before you don't really recognize it, because we're so used to seeing oil paint, and we don't recognize it as a toxin and as a product of the fossil fuel industry, right? So if you're using something that is toxic on purpose, then please make it, visible to us without having to read the wall text, okay? That would be my plea to all of the artists that are exhibiting today. Okay, so I'm going to just share a little bit of what Diane Arrieta has said about these particular questions, because I think her work is mysterious. She wants you to work. So how many of you know which artwork is Diane Arrieta's? Okay, so a few of you. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so anybody, what is this all about? And did anybody click on the QR code and see what she says about it? Okay, so that to me is a problem, but it's also something that Diane specifically does. You know, she makes a very mysterious, wonderful, Disney-like image, personage, and then she sort of she's looking at you askance, and she's saying, are you smart enough to figure this out? You know,
Are you paying attention?
You're paying attention, and you need to pay attention. So this is a Yeti. It's a little Yeti, you know, and we all believe somehow, or some of us do at least, that they exist. You know, I would say the same people who believe that Yetis exist also believe that there's no climate problem. And in fact, the title of her work kind of implies that, right? So she's using a little bit of humor. She's kind of giving you a little dig, you know. But she's doing it with this luscious little adorable thing that you would want to have in your child's nursery,
Right.
you know, because it's just so cute. She is also one of the most intellectual artists I've ever met. She studies everything. She knows all of the current research on how you change people's minds. She works with the psychology of it. And one of the things that she's come up with is cuteness. Cuteness, Disney, small, tiny, something you can hug, you know, draws you in, and then boom, you know, this is what this really means. And so don't hesitate to click on your QR code over there. If you don't know how, ask somebody, don't miss it, because what the little Yeti is saying is really important. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I really want you to go look for yourself, because that's how experiencing Diane Arrieta's art is all about. So please take the time to do that. I'm not going to read exactly what you said, because I think this probably, you know, gets it across just as well. Not as well, but because she would be great if she were here. Unfortunately, I wish she weren't sick. So let's go to the next question, which is getting into climate science and how daunting it is to keep up with it. So what are the ways you stay current, Carin? How do you use applied science in this big project that's coming up?
So first, I follow climate scientists and climate journalists. I read books, I read magazines, you know, periodicals, anything I can get my hands on. And it doesn't necessarily apply to trees, but if I ever miss an article about trees, one of my friends is sure to send it to me, which I just love that. Because 9 times out of 10, I've already read it, but if I haven't, it's like, oh, thank you. But just reading prodigiously about everything I can get my hands on, basically.
And what about you?
Well, from a project perspective, like when we work with the Reef Institute, we work directly with their scientists. So we have the honor of being in these kind of collaborative spaces with other scientists, and that's really great, and researchers. In terms of specifically for climate change, I have the honor of being on the series of committees with the U.S. Water Alliance, and they had an arts program. Who would have guessed? They're basically the national lobbyists for water utilities in this country. And they created an arts program one year, and they invited artists to come and speak and do different events and things like that. They had water bars where you taste water from all over the country.
Oh, fabulous.
It's really interesting, and what's going on with the water,
Yeah.
and the stories behind the water, and some of the water being toxic, or, you know, it's really powerful, and that's a group of artists. And so for the current group that I'm with is their climate change panel, and I'm the only, well, there's another 1 or 2 artists on there, and but there was a researcher doing work at the University of Oregon, and she was explaining this thing about these fresh water bodies emitting methane and nitrous and carbon dioxide, and because of our pollutant levels in nitrogen and phosphorus, they're all out of whack, and the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted off of the fresh water bodies, the numbers she was talking about were astonishing. I mean, they were like, I was like, I actually sent her on the chat on the side. I'm like, whoa. I was just like, no one's gonna believe that. I was just like, what are you talking about? You know, she's like 10 or 20 or 30% global, you know, emissions, and the numbers are not totally fixed yet. They're still working on it, but it's massive. And I said, you know, I started talking with her. We started, you know, having a lot of. Her name is Marina Nisha, and she has done this work, and it's based on a lot of other people's work. But basically, I said to her, it's like places like Florida, we could become, you know, climate heroes because we have all these water bodies that right now are so loaded with phosphorus and so loaded with nitrogen. You could basically mine those. You know, you could reverse the situation and really have a big dent on climate change. So, if I'm not involved in those Zoom meetings and those things, I mean, I'm not learning. And then once we learned that, I said, we have to get the news out. Like, we have to, like, so they've invited us to give talks and stuff like that. And we were just going around talking to whoever we could about any, you know, the folks in the Great Lakes. And they were like, the numbers are what? You know, and I'm like, I know, ask her. She's the one who's got all the research. Yeah. And they're like, those numbers are wrong. I'm like, just talk to her. She'll give you the papers, you know, and it's amazing. So that, really, it's through our work and through our interactions with other people. I mean, we read a lot, but I wish we had more time to read even more. But those interactions, those key nuggets, really, it's like, wow, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think if artists want to work with climate, yeah, it's really important to be responsible about it and know what you're doing. You know, so reading constantly. Diane says that she reads at least 2 journals, cover to cover, every week. You know, science journals that are related to her, because she's also a scientist. She has a master's degree in wildlife health. So she's keeping up with her scientific field, even though she's a full-time artist. So you know, keeping up with the science is critical if you're going to try to work with scientists, and even if you're not, even if you're just going to do something out of your head that you think, you know, might be helpful to science. Well, it really should be correct. You know, it should be up to date. So that's one of the reasons why we did the resource list for you. The other reason we did the resource list is that many organizations that are working with artists, and even the ones that are not working with artists, I would like to say especially the ones that are not yet working with artists. Come on, artists. You can go talk to them. Yeah. Take Frances Whitehead's What Do Artists Know with you and tell them what it is that you know so that you can help them, because you can. And you can do it more than painting a picture of a landscape. You can do much more than that. And so that's, I think, the key of, I think, that what this panel is trying to get across is let's take the next step. Let's raise the level in Palm Beach County. Let's have an embedded artist in every environmental organization in Palm Beach County. Let's have at least one in every single one. Okay? Did you have a question or a comment?
No, I just wanted to say too is I work in film. That's another venue. There are so many venues. I know Amy too. There's all different types of, not just the traditional, and I just think that when I do my films and I'm using materials, I use eco-friendly materials. Otherwise, I would be a hypocrite, you know? And I feel also a lot that's happening on our planet is because a lot of greed. And I'm just saying for me, not everyone here, but I learned through a friend of mine by me eating meat, like cattle. There's so many lands now, forests, the Amazon, whatever, taken up for cattle and all the animals that we humans raise. So it's like each of us needs to be conscious of what we can do about the problem, right? I think each of us as human beings and artists, we're so disconnected from trees, which have emotions also. It's like we live isolated and think the planet's for us, but it's not. It's for life.
Thank you for your comment. And I just would like to remind you to click on the QR code there to get the resource list. And I really hope that I'll be seeing a lot of embedded artists in some of these wonderful organizations that we have here in Palm Beach County. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So this is on collaboration. We've already sort of dealt with it, but I'll read the question because I think it's an important one, so we can all be thinking about it. Some artists choose to work on climate disruption through collaboration with scientists, scientific institutions, advocacy organizations, and community groups. So I kind of addressed that a little bit already. Please comment on whether, why, or why not, and how you engage such a collaborative approach. Who are some other artists who have been particularly successful? So I think that last part, maybe if you all wanted to just come up with an artist that is not you, that you can that you can point to as, you know, having a practice that's really, you know, important with regard to collaboration, because, you know, in studio art, still, unfortunately, unless you're working in film, it's very individualistic. It's like, they even have little separate studios that for every student. You go into your little separate studio, you do your work, and you exhibit it, and you defend it, and all that, but, you know, there's very little training on how to work with others, and especially to work across discipline with people who are not artists. So when they have collaborations, it will be collaborations with other artists, but not ever that I know of. I mean, speak up if you've been in a program that has that. I want to know about it.
Diane and I collaborate.
Pardon?
So Diane Arrieta and I have collaborated.
Yeah, but you're both artists. So I'm
I
talking
understand.
about, you know, working with other artists. This is collaboration across discipline. You know, so you're doing collaborative, partnerships kinds of thing. The kind of thing that Michael Singer and his studio have been doing for almost 30 years now. I mean, they're really you know, pioneers in the area. So please look them up. Okay, so I'm going to. Did you want to say who another artist might be that you?
Yeah, I encountered a really interesting one. I will say, before I talk about this project, which I found fascinating, that I wouldn't be able to do any of that endangered tree work if it weren't for the science writer that got me started on all of this, and all of the botanists and conservation organizations and authors. Just like, there are so many people involved in each tree that I managed to find and do my research on and photograph. Each one of those trees required many different people helping me. So with that, there's an example at the Speed Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, that I encountered this past year that was just fascinating. It was a big glass sculpture, and the artist, whose name is Wolfgang Buttress. I mean, Buttress, what a great name for an artist, because he's dealing with trees. And anyway, Dr. Martin Benchik, the two of them together collaborated in attaching accelerometers to the trunk of the original Bramley apple tree in England. So like the very original tree that is dying. So he attached accelerometers, and in real time, you get to see inside this glass cube that he's constructed. I mean, it's just layer upon layer upon layer of glass, and inside he's got a projection of what the tree's vibrations look like, and it looks like a tree. So this is just the vibrations being conveyed inside of this. And then they've grafted one of the branches from the original apple tree, planted it next to it, and they've attached accelerometers to that, and that, as it's growing, is also going to replace the original dying tree. So I just found that fascinating. So if you ever get a chance to get to the Speed Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, I thought that was fabulous.
There is wonderful work going on outside of New York.
Yeah.
Also here in Palm Beach County. So thanks to all the artists that came forward in this show.
One of my favorites since I was a student, because I studied landscape architecture, was Mel Chin. And his Revival Field projects, if you're familiar with those. You know, he worked with, I think it was someone from the USDA.
Yes.
I don't know the name of the scientist.
Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, and they knew that certain plants could actually absorb contaminants from contaminated land.
Heavy metals.
Yeah, and so and some of the paints, like you referenced earlier, people were painting with toxic paints like cobalt and the blues. In this particular case, I think one of his revival fields was cadmium, and cadmium is extremely toxic. And so they knew that there were certain plants in the world that would grow on naturally occurring deposits of cadmium. So if there was cadmium being mined somewhere, you could find a plant that just over a very long period of time learned to adapt to soils that were laden with cadmium. So they said, that's interesting, let's study these plants. And so they were studying them in terms of how the plants could uptake. There's phytoremediation where they actually break down the cadmium. This is the case that Milchin worked with was phytoextraction, because he was actually looking to extract the cadmium. So he worked with the USDA. They set up a big fence, because you had to have a fence to keep people out. You don't want kids eating the cadmium-laden plants or anything like that. And they planted these plants, and the plants extracted the cadmium, and then Mel actually went and kind of found a way to like bake down or process or boil down the plants. He actually got the cadmium out of it and made red paint as a part of the paintings.
Wow.
That he did. He was able to sell those paintings and continue his work, his research, and then so it's a powerful thing. And so more projects like that, more of those types of collaborations, not only raise awareness and gives you a little chills, right?
Right.
But that's where those connections start to happen, and that's what we think is really valuable in terms of artists really engaging in collaboration.
I want to share Diane Arrieta's favorite artist and why, and also her least favorite artist, because she has very strong opinions. I wish she were here, she's so great. But at any rate, what she says is, Banksy lives in my space. Banksy. His work is emotionally spot on. His piece on climate, where the words disappear in the river, or the girl swinging in a parking lot with the word park highlighted and the ing whited out. Brilliant, right? Oliver Eliasson, on the other hand, is putting pieces of Arctic ice at a climate conference and saying, let's start a conversation. And she does. Z. I don't think we need to be taking any more melting ice off an iceberg and big deal. Ice is melting. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Some conversation. This doesn't help the guy in India who is flooded out of his home because of his ability to have the ability to be included in the conversation. It's a spectacle, not a conversation. So, yeah. Banksy and Oliver Eliasson. Are you all familiar with the piece of iceberg he brought down? Can you imagine the fossil fuels that were used just to ship that thing to Paris? Oh my God. Anyway, okay, so.
So, Mary Jo, it's already 3 o'clock, so we probably should just let people, if they have few questions.
And she's been waiting
to wrap
over
up.
there. She's had her hand up.
I just wanted to mention, because you would be very interested in this, and hopefully I was too, that when I lived in Cleveland, and in the city of Shaker Heights, they had actually a tree person who went around, and they found, like you said, things were eating every single tree. So what they did was they researched it, and they found that they had one type of tree, another type of tree, and not the whole street of trees, and rotated them, that the trees didn't die anymore, because
Thank you.
that was a really good thing.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly right. When they plant just an avenue of the exact same tree and a pest comes along, all of them die.
Right.
So there's absolutely an
And
argument to
save
be
all the
made for the
trees.
diversity. That's smart.
Isn't that what happened in Brooklyn, where one of the elm trees were being decimated, and they took down the elms?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
I
on the
remember that.
National Mall, it's all
Yeah.
elms too.
And I have a question for you. You apparently tasted these many waters. Which water did you think was the best?
I actually thought most of them were good. I mean, I didn't have any. I didn't have any.
You
I
think
can
New
tell
York
differences.
water was the best?
No, I mean, New York's water is very good. They didn't have New York's water at the conference, I don't
Okay.
believe. But New York's water, because of the way they protected really massive,
Yeah,
it's the land. It's protected. They locked up that land.
So most were good.
Most were good.
Which was bad?
I don't actually recall offhand, but
You're just not telling me.
yeah. I mean, it tends to be that the different. Remember, it's the main lobbying organization also for and research organization for water utilities in the country. So most people aren't going to travel across the country if they think their water's poor.
Okay.
And it's also they have to take it to the airports and stuff. It's a real challenge to like, come with like these big things of water, and the airlines get freaked out.
Yeah.
So, it's real
Okay, so we're already open for conversation,
Yeah.
so, anybody, yes, go ahead, you, with the blue shirt.
Oh, okay. I wanted to know if you could speak to, in particular, the American chestnut tree, and what, we have one on our property in Massachusetts.
Oh,
And it keeps shooting up,
Yes.
trying to grow, but then this canker
Yep, the fungal
comes out
blight.
on it, and those pieces die and then more come up. Can you speak to what is being done for that tree?
So, the American Chestnut Foundation, I highly recommend you go and look at their website. Right now, they've, and a lot of people are against genetically modifying anything, but they have taken this teeny tiny, it's like 0.01% of a wheat gene, and they have crossed it with a chestnut tree to make it resistant to that blight. So they've also been involved in, back crossing and hybridizing the Japanese chestnut that introduced the blight to make these trees more resistant. So their goal is to get as little of the actual, foreign element in the tree, but just to allow it to be reintroduced to the American landscape, because the roots are not affected. You're right. All of those roots are still underground in a lot of the places where the chestnut trees grew, and they'll send up all those little shoots.
I feel so bad, that poor thing is trying every year.
Exactly.
And in one year, it did produce a
So
chestnut,
if it
but
does
didn't
that, you can
develop.
send that burr to the Chestnut Foundation, and they appreciate that when you're harvesting those seeds. So you could be part of the solution.
So, somebody else over there that I missed? You, yes.
I have a question on toxic oil paints.
Toxic oil paint?
Oil paint,
Yes. What about it?
Well, are they all toxic? And what
I'm not an
about
expert.
oil?
I'm sorry, I'm not an expert
You
on that. I
could
don't
Google
know.
that.
Yeah.
There's quite a few
Yeah,
of
you
them,
could just
like
Google
ruby
that
red,
to find out
cobalt,
which
cadmium,
are.
beautiful color.
Wait, the
toxic.
answer's coming here. Go ahead.
Now, as I say, he's already mentioned a couple. Cadmium,
He did
as
mention
gorgeous as it
cadmium,
is,
yes.
it's toxic. And then you have, don't forget that artists were, we said about cobalt, but the artist for a long time was taking titanium for the white. How many of us artists, when we were younger, licked the brush and then kept painting for that fine stuff? After a while you realize, spackle will work. Just throw it all on there and real safe for it at a distance. But yeah, there's quite a few of them. So if you have I have a whole box full of my stuff, and I, use it very moderately. But even you have the mineral. They say, oh, we don't have the actual turpentine, but we have mineral spirits. Well, I got news. It's the same thing.
We have better solvents now.
But even so, I don't care. The Leonardo one is still as toxic. I mean, if you drink
Gamsol, no, Gamsol's better.
It's-
There's
it's
now
still-
very, very good.
if you can't drink it, it's toxic.
There's odorless, free, they're really not, Gamsol, for instance, try that.
No.
There's no odor.
The question, those are things you use.
Solvents.
We see.
They've come a long way.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
let's just say you don't use any.
Well, then you could use the synthetics.
No.
And
I was just asking, what about oil paints?
So,
Yeah.
can I
It
just
is
make a
toxic.
suggestion? I make a
Yeah.
suggestion. Artists' resources and artists' help is that lady over there.
Right.
So maybe you could have a workshop on how you can paint like oil paint without using toxic substances. I mean, it's a whole separate issue. So
Yeah.
I would say that, toxic versus non-toxic is a whole great subject for Palm Beach County artists
Yeah, I agree.
to work on.
Because so many people use them.
Exactly.
And don't forget that even metallic pigments, I use a lot of just the powder form.
Yeah.
Metallic pigments can also be toxic. So you have to watch out, just research each one. If you don't want it, just try to do something less toxic. I mean,
Yeah,
there's water
let's-
char, there's.
Can we just
I
cut-
agree,
can we
that would be a perfect
cut
thing
to a
do.
workshop? Yeah,
Yeah.
whole workshop just on that.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else over here?
I just got one
You
more
spoke
thing.
already. Could I have somebody else before you?
Somebody over here.
So in
Yes,
regards
back
to
there.
that
Go ahead.
question, there are 4 big toxic pigments that you need to avoid in oil paint, which are cadmium, cobalt, mercurial sulfides, and lead. And those are used in ingredients in oil paint. The oil paint itself is not toxic, it's those pigments created from these toxic substances. And so as long as you avoid those and don't do, mineral spirits or anything, you should be fine with the oil paints.
But there are other toxic substances that are not paint, so that belongs in a workshop. So can we have a question that's not on toxic substances? Yeah.
Yeah, getting to the end, thank you for doing, the reef as a diver and also a fisher. I watched the event coming out of Jupiter Inlet. When you say something that 2% of our reefs or 98% are gone in Florida, what has been the biggest devastation? Is it just the amount of boats and, or is it, what's predominant, or is it just a whole bunch of things? Phosphorus.
Temperature.
By all means.
Okay.
Yep, the water temperature.
The partner.
So before stony coral tissue loss disease was detected in 2014, we were at about 8% of our reefs left.
We can't hear you over here.
Oh, sorry. Before stony coral tissue loss disease was detected in 2014, we were somewhere between 6 and 8% of our reefs were left. It was still kind of in a very devastated place. There's no one issue. That I think that's it's interesting because we're working with a documentarian who's actually doing a documentary on the state of reefs in the Caribbean. And one of the things he and I talked about in the interview that I was sharing before everyone came in is that we all want to point to the one thing so that we can solve it. So it's almost nice that the chestnut tree, it's a blight,
Right.
so we can attack the blight, and that's what it is. But when it comes to the ocean, when it comes to our reefs, it's all of it. It's boating, it's people on the water and in the water, and the way that we treat the water. It's all the products that we put on our bodies before we go into the water, not just sunscreen, but a lot of things in our hair when we go into the water. It's divers and fishermen before they knew any better. There's a great documentary about Jacques Cousteau telling the story of how when he first invented scuba equipment, and as wonderful as it was that he created the first film underwater, all of these stories of how poorly they treated the ocean. And he actually, that first film that he made at the end of his life, he didn't want it shown anymore because he was kind of embarrassed at how far he had come as an environmentalist. So to your point, the stony coral tissue loss disease came through, and what is devastating about that disease is we only have 46 different reef-building species of coral in Florida, and 23 to 25 of them are affected by this disease. Once it affects a coral colony, that colony is gone in a matter of weeks, no more than a matter of a couple of months. It's fast, high mortality rate, and attacks a lot. Not the first disease corals have ever gotten. So so that's what's taken it out now to this next level. And now we're at a place where we have to restore it.
So one of the things is that the Reef Institute's doing is, and some other groups at University of Miami and stuff like that, they're getting in moat. They're finding the corals that are resisting, just like your chestnut that made it through. And they're breeding them now, in the lab that we showed up there. They're breeding them, and they need places to go. A lot of it, most of the water out there is just sand, as you know, when you swim out there, it's sand. But the rocky areas, the artificial reefs and things like that, they need places to be. They need to be close enough together so they can breed. And so the idea is that hopefully we caused a ton of damage, 98% loss. Hopefully that 2%, we can get maybe another 2% back in the lab, get them back out there, they're more resistant, and hopefully if they have enough locations to grow on, we can slowly have those corals recolonize and create a stronger reef that will also help protect us from rising sea levels and storm surge, which is definitely coming.
It's not a part of the art exhibit, but yes, we do a lot of coral things. Our first set of juvenile corals went in the ocean right here in Lake Worth 2 months ago. So actively restoring the reefs on both sides.
So I just want to thank the Reef Institute for both coming today as well as doing a very exciting research together with the art studio, Michael Singer Studio. And I want to thank all of you for coming today. It's been a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you.